So I created this quick document um, for our combat system. Basically, I'm saying if the player moves into the room and there are enemies in that room, the player cannot move to another room, and we'll start our combat. Inside of our combat, we're going to have different variables that will affect our combat. So we will have to determine the player's weapon type, which will determine the output of damage, the player's armor, which will determine the damage resistance, health, which is your health before you die, your luck for a chance of a critical hit. Maybe we'll add in a special item slot for maybe you could bring a grenade with you, or instead of having you manually use a stim pack like in Fallout Shelter, maybe you could just bring a health pack, and this would be like a manual thing that you can or the player can utilize instead of all the automated combat. Um, just depends on how you want to do it, but I think this would be a good exercise for us to do. We'll also have to factor in the enemy's weapon, which will be their damage to the player. We could set this up by enemy type, but I think it would be better to have it each enemy have their own enemy weapon, because then you can reuse enemy types with different weapons or different armors, and that kind of lets you recycle assets without making things more complicated, and it still adds that variation of enemies in combat. It just depends on how you're going to do it. So if you had a mole rat, it wouldn't make sense for them to have different weapons or different armors. But if you had, enemy soldiers, like maybe one would have a rifle, or maybe another one would have a pistol or a shotgun. So in those instances, it would be nice to have those variations. So our weapons will do our damage to the players. They'll have their own damage resistance, their own health, and in Fallout Shelter, we noticed that some boss enemies have special abilities, so such as like they can throw a grenade, or the mole rat boss can summon smaller mole rats. So that's something to keep in mind as well, is having a special ability for each enemy type that can trigger on maybe a randomized timer during combat. As far as the weapon variables, this is kind of like their stats. So if we have a weapon, we'll have our damage output, our rate of fire. If it's a gun, it will have its magazine capacity before it has to be reloaded, and then how fast it will reload. For armor, we're going to have our damage resistance. Um, if you want, you could do a special resistance also, such as if there's radiation in your game, or if the enemy has energy weapons, or it could be anything that you decide to do for your game, like fire weapons, ice weapons, like what their resistance is to each type. So I know in Fallout, like some enemies do radiation, so maybe if you're wearing a rad suit, you're more resistant to that. Um, for our players, we have our health value. We could base that on a stat or the experience level or both. For the player's luck, we'll base that on the same thing, either a stat or the experience level or both. And our luck will determine our critical hit chance, and um, we could also have it do our item drop chance, um, to see if you either get an item or maybe even the type of item that you get. But I think this is a good uh, basis for our combat system. And once we get our stats in for our player, our enemy, and we follow along with our weapon types, armor types, health, we'll create some simple examples of all these. Then we can start our automated combat, and it's going to turn out really cool. Okay, now we have our combat system written out. Let's start creating our script for that. And I'm just going to make a new folder. Try to organize this a little bit. And we'll just call this one player stats. And for now, I'm just going to do something simple like do a float. And so we have our damage output. We have our damage resistance, our health, and our luck. And I'm going to do something similar for the enemy. We do our damage output, damage resistance, health. And let's just do that for now. I know we mentioned special item slots and special abilities, but let's keep it simple and we can add on to this. I want to make another folder for, I guess we'll do items. And then we could put our weapons in here as well. Oops. And we'll have weapon stats. And in here, this will be damage output. This one will be different. Rate of fire, magazine capacity, and reload speed. And do armor stats, and then I'm going to try to spell it correctly. There we go. I don't know if we'll use that special resistance, but I'm going to put it in here for now anyway. And now we have these different stats that are going to affect our player. So here's our little player, and right now we don't really have anything else on him other than our animation manager. I'm going to override his prefab, put the player stats on here. Now I want these stats to be different, or to be adjusted rather, depending on, what weapon or armor he has equipped. So we're gonna have to make some references and kind of make this a little dynamic for different weapon types. So if there is no weapon, I don't know, maybe he does like 1 damage. Maybe his resistance is 1. We want to keep his health at 100. And we'll just start his luck out at 1. So we need to figure out how we're going to connect this together. Now he does have, and your sprite layout will be a little bit different than mine, but I believe this guy has a little spot for a gun. And if he doesn't, I will make one for him. Okay, he does not. So I'm going to add in just a little spot for him to have. Oh, there it is actually. So he does have some stuff here. Let's see if I can view this. Alright, it says we have a little laser gun, which I do not see. So I think the way this is set up, I believe this might be tied into one of his animations. Not really sure. Or it's just not set up properly. Well, there it is. It was invisible. So we have a little gun for our guy here. He's also got some type of laser sword. A slash effect. Neat. Okay. So we won't be using that. So I'm going to create a folder and just organize weapons for these characters. And I'm actually going to remove that and make a prefab out of just the gun. Now I am going to leave the gun on him, and I may change this to a weapon location later on. But for now, I'm just going to leave the gun on there, and I'm going to put the weapon stats on this gun. Yeah, I want to put on the prefab. Oh man. Here we go. Revert. So he's got this laser gun, right? We're gonna say it does 20 damage. I don't know what our rate of fire is defined as yet because we didn't program that out. So I'm going to say maybe it's like per second. So we'll do like 1 shot per second and we'll adjust it as we need to. And maybe this can shoot 3 times before it needs to reload. And maybe it takes him 3 seconds to reload. This type of gun. And I want to just paste in his values as default for the prefab itself. I also want to just rename this to like, laser pistol. Oops. Cool. And I think this should actually be in front. Let's see where his hand actually is. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so let's make that 2. And we'll check where his hand is. His hand is 1. Okay. Now I don't want it in front of his torso, so that back hand is not in the right layer. So let's find our torso. And we are at 1. So maybe put the left hand at 0. Actually, I think we're going to go to the negatives. -1. And then this will be at 0. Yep, cool. So I have this little sci-fi gun pack that I found on the asset store. And I think what we're going to do is just make it so we enable and disable whatever weapon, because I'm not going to have a lot of weapons. It looks like I have the little pistol he came with, maybe another type of pistol. Was this machine gun, a laser gun, and a rocket? It looks like we have a blaster and flamethrower. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 guns. Plus 7. That one right there. So I'm just going to drag these all into the scene. Never mind. We're going to drag one at a time into the scene. There we go. Then I'm going to take them and put them right where the laser pistol is. Can I do it that way? There we go. And then I'm going to copy the transform location. And paste it. And you can see the scale's not the same. So let's shrink that down. And I'm going to disable them all and just do one at a time. I'm just going to put them in the position that I want them to be in. And then I can even go to the firing animation and see what it's going to look like when he's shooting it. So that I can really get it into that proper position. So there's the blaster. Here's our flamethrower. Here's another pistol gun. And whatever assets you're using are obviously going to be different. So this is all just dependent on how you are making yours and what type of assets you're using. But this is still just the basic idea. Cool. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different weapons that our character can potentially have. So I want them all to have this weapon stats. And each one's going to be different. And I think what I want to do is make it so that we have like something called on enable as a method. And basically what this does is when one of these becomes enabled, then This function is called when the object becomes enabled and active. So when this becomes enabled, I want it to go to the player stats and readjust everything. So it's basically going to overwrite all of the player stats with our adjustments from the damage, rate of fire, magazine, and reload speed. So, so we're also going to need that a reference to the player stats. So here, this basically says if our player stats doesn't have a value, then find the player and grab the script. So that's the first thing it's going to do. Next, we wanted to send these values over to the player stats. So over on player stats, let's make a public method, and this will be like update stats. And on the weapon stats, that's what we're going to call. So we're going to do player stats dot update stats. Now, what we're going to update on the player stats side is the damage output. So we'll do float damage out. And that's so the way this works is basically it's going to run the method in player stats, and it's going to send it this value that we have on our current weapon. So then the player stats here, they're going to say, oh, okay, my damage output equals that value that just came over. Now we already had like a base damage output, so we have to figure out what kind of system we want to set up too. Like, do we want to multiply our damage? Like, do we want to multiply our damage? Do we want to just add to our damage, to our base damage output that we already have? Or do we want to just fully replace it? Now, if you're making a game where it's like an RPG where you can level up and then your damage increases based on your level plus whatever weapon you're using, then you'd want to change this so like your damage output equals the value that came in plus your character stat, or like plus your character's level that defines that increased damage amount. But for this, I figure we're just using guns. Doesn't really matter how strong your character is. a gun is still going to do the same amount of damage, regardless of your character being level 15 or level 30, unless his aim gets better. So, that could be a factor, but I think I'll leave that up to the luck stat in my game. You can adjust things for your game if you want. That would be a really cool idea um, to implement like an accuracy thing into your game and have that also determine damage out, or even like if you even hit the enemy. So that's something to consider. But we're going to keep it simple for our game. Now, if I'm also going to be controlling everything from the player stats here, I think I'm going to pull in everything from this side as well. And these don't have to be public unless we want to see like the values that we're changing. But I don't really want to change these in the interface. But I will serialize the fields just so I can look at what they've changed to. So I think I will have a output of everything here. Or not an output, but parameters on this method. Now I'm doing a lot of copying and pasting here. You always want to be careful doing that, because if I accidentally did that, now my reload speed is the same as my fire rate, and I'm going to have a bug later, and I'm going to be very confused on why that happened. So just be careful. Oh, here's the other thing to watch out for. So this is in a specific order. It's damage, fire rate, magazine capacity, reload speed. On this side, I need to do it the same exact way, because if this is in a different order, then it's going to, like, say I had reload speed second, like this, damage, reload, rate of fire. When I go to the player stats, it's going to put it in that order. It's going to go damage, then this value here, this is going to be reload speed. So my rate of fire will become my reload speed, and then it's just going to be giving me the wrong values. So you want to make sure these are in order when you're doing this. So damage, rate of fire, magazine, reload. Let's check this side just to make sure. Damage, rate of fire, magazine, reload. Okay, cool. So we have our armor stats here, and we have our player stats here. So why don't we do the same exact thing for this one? So I'm going to change this to update weapon stats, just for a little more clarity, and then I'll have to change it over here. And then I'll do a separate one for update armor stats. And we're going to do damage resist and element resist. And we might want to mention that that's a void. Okay, cool. So then on the armor stats side, we're just going to do the same thing we did in weapon stats. On enable, we can find the player's stats, and I'm just going to copy this right over. But we need this also. And we did damage first, special resistance second, and then just like that, update armor stats. Now, since we have it on enable for our armor, we would need some kind of objects and visuals just like we did with our weapons here. So the way my sprite is set up here is each piece is a separate part on him, and all these parts are animated through the animator here. Yours might be different, so that depends on how you're setting yours up. If yours is just one piece, well, it's going to be hard to do something dynamic. You could try to overlay the armor on top of like his torso. For me, I should be able to just replace it or stick something over it. So he's got a body here. Let me see my other characters. So here's another body. Where is the parents? Is it this one? Nope. So I don't know how this is going to look. It might look silly. Here we go. And I'm going to put it in the same position. Copy component. Paste component value. Definitely different. Let me stick that in front for now. Okay. Now this body was at 1, so I'll put this one at 1. And then for the animator, you have to be careful because if your animation includes the body, which mine does not, where it uses the bones that are above everything. So I'm able to turn this off and hit play and keep that on there without it breaking it, because if I had bone 000 and I rename this to like body armor or anything else, this would show an error right here and it wouldn't be animated anymore. So you have to be careful with that. So the way ours is set up, we should be able to change this. So I'm just going to put body underscore spacesuit, and then this one will be body underscore leather jacket. Yep. And I think the hand was sticking over during that. Yeah, see that? Um, so let me just find his right hand. Yes. And we'll just put that at 2. We'll put his upper arm at 3. Cool. So now he's got another piece of armor. And what we can do is put our armor stats on here. There it is. And so when one of these enables, it will overwrite our player stats to have the updated armor. So we will have to define that in here. So like maybe his spacesuit is, you know, 10 and 10. It's pretty balanced. But maybe the leather jacket, I don't know, it's 15 on damage resist and not very good on special resistance. So, that's up to you to define these things. But when one of these becomes enabled, it will overwrite those stats. And when we create the system to equip your weapon or your armor before you go on a mission, we'll set it up so only one will pop up and those stats will carry over to the mission area. And just to test things out, so we're gonna put the leather jacket on. 10, or this one has 15 damage resistance. The other one had 10. And I'll put on the laser pistol. We have 20 damage, and then we'll also try. You know, I'll just put in like ones here. We'll try the flamethrower next. So rate of fire might be a lot more. I don't know. So let's see if our stats change here. Okay, so the pistol that we have equipped is 20, 133, 20, 133, and then there's our leather jacket stats. Cool. So let's see what happens if we switch back. And we can only have one active at a time. So let's see if we hit play, if that loads properly. Yep, look at that, 10, 20, 1, 1, and then we have our 10 damage resistant elemental. So cool. Looks like that works. Alright, so now that we have that working, I'm going to apply all from my alien prefab here.